Hey everyone, the Eclectic Candyman here on this 2001 Mustang COBRA, and today we're going to be replacing the rear brakes. These are pretty straightforward, assuming we don't run into any problems. There may be some different size bolts, but what we need to do is go ahead and remove this one, which is 12 millimeter on this car, as well as this one here is another 12 millimeter. And then we'll be able to take this bracket off. That's where the pads are. And actually on this, the rear brakes, you don't even need to remove the bracket to remove the rotor, as you'll see. So let's go ahead and start removing those 12 millimeter bolts. Now I've gone ahead and popped them loose. I chose this time not to use air because these bolts actually weren't that hard. Just needed a little pop, and I'm using a ratcheting wrench right here. And we'll just remove these bolts evenly. They're not that long. And again, I chose not to use air compressor and air tools this time. And there we go. We got my hand already on them. I'll show you the length of these bolts. They are not that long. We'll clean them up before we reinstall. And just, there we go. So it's definitely that's the only thing that made it a little bit difficult to get out, was a little bit of rust. All right, and then let's go ahead and finish loosening this bottom one here. And just remember, you're looking at it backwards, so don't get confused. You'll figure it out pretty quickly if you start tightening it. All right, and there's the second bolt. It's got, trying to get that in focus there, it's got a little bit of rust as well. Okay, and now we need to remove this bracket right here, and sometimes it'll come out by hand. Just make sure that the parking brake isn't on, but if you need to, you can just give it a little bit of a tap with a rubber mallet. If it's just not hitting with any real force, I'm just trying to knock that back out, and there we go. This is held on by both the brake line, which I'm actually going to be replacing with a stainless steel line, just like I did in my other video, and the brake line, which is at the bottom. So it's held up quite a bit with more tension than it is in the front, so you don't need anything special to hang it. What we're going to want to inspect is to look in there and see if our seal is torn, and if we're going to either need to replace the caliper or rebuild the caliper. You want to check the integrity of that seal all around in there. Also notice that with the rear caliper that there are notches in the top and in the bottom that look like that triangle right there. They are oriented exactly to the top and bottom of the caliper, and we'll be using a special tool to turn that back into the caliper, assuming this doesn't need to be replaced or rebuilt. The tool will go in there, we'll turn it with a socket wrench. So this is different than pressing it back in like we did on the front. And then we won't even have to remove this bracket because we can take our pads out. And these ones still had actually a decent amount of wear, unlike the front that I did that was down to the metal. And I'm going to show you a little trick here with the rotor. It's not really a trick, it's just, normally you'd think you got to remove this bracket in order to get the rotor off. But in reality, I'll get a couple hands on it. Only thing I need to do is just take it out like that. So it goes in like that, it comes out like that. That's all you got to do. Set it aside. All right, now we need to get a better look at our caliper and see if the seal has any integrity issues. And this one appears to be in okay shape, unlike the other side that I did, in which it was ripped. So let's go ahead and get our new parts. Let's clean this up. We'll do a wire brush on this part right here. We'll get that turned back in using our tool, get our new pads and rotors, and then to top it off, I will be replacing the brake line. Before we get back to doing our rear brakes, I had an opportunity to show you what the inside of the rear brake caliper looks like, because on one of the other side caliper I was working on has a tear in it. So I've got a repair kit that I'll end up doing. But I wanted to show you what's different between the front caliper and the rear caliper. So you can see that screw on the rear caliper, and here's the caliper piston. So in order to get this to compress into the cylinder, we actually turn it clockwise, and then it screws back into the cylinder. That's as opposed to the front one, which isn't on a screw and it just goes straight back in. And that's why we'll use a tool like this, because those little notches right there will go into the notch on the piston, and we'll be able to turn it, and then making sure we leave the notches directly top and bottom so that they can fit into the grooves on the caliper. If you happen to run into the same problem, you have two choices. You can either replace the caliper if you have a seal issue or a leak, or you can get a repair kit. The Ford manual, or excuse me, the Haynes manual actually recommends not rebuilding the rear caliper. It specifically says in it, just go ahead and replace the caliper. But in this case, I just have that seal in the inner one, so I'm going to go ahead and do it. And unlike the front where you use compressed air, you simply turn counterclockwise and unscrew it, and it pops out. So that's a little bit of the insight about what the rear caliper looks like and why we have to turn it back into the caliper as opposed to straight pressing it back. All right. So I've taken the rear caliper off the car. This is not necessary. It's just a lot easier to show you how this works. This can be done with the car on. These two notches, unlike the front caliper, we have to turn this piston. It's got a screw. We turn it back in to compress it back into the caliper. And we'll use a tool like this. So this has the appropriate notches on all the different sides, and I just have it on a wrench. It's also worth mentioning quickly that there are better tools to push this caliper back in than these tools that go at the end of a wrench. There are ones from, say, like Harbor Freight that will put a plate right here and use the same style of tool that can be twisted from the top, making it much easier to get leverage. And I highly recommend one of those rear caliper tools, because trying to get leverage with this without being on a workbench is difficult. I have done it several times on the Mustangs with these notch calipers, but it's much easier. It's one of the cliche right tool for the right job. And so to show you, we just get those down into the grooves, and then we can begin to turn that. You see that? And we just continue to turn. This is going to screw the piston right back into the caliper. Now, this is obviously a lot easier the way I have it because I can get leverage. But this can be done on the car. You'll just have to be careful if it's still attached to the line, obviously, as you most of the time would. And also, you'll notice it's probably a little bit easier because I don't have brake fluid in it. So you would want to remove the master cylinder cap, as it would push the fluid back up into the car. All right, so we'll keep twisting this until we get all the way flush. We'll keep turning that back in. And the last thing to note, when we're done, we must keep the two notches exactly as we first had them, straight up and down. The reason being, this notch is going to fit into this notch right here on the caliper. So you can't just have this anywhere. These should be directly up and down. We'll continue pressing this back in until it's flush. We can load our caliper up and continue on with our job. All right, now it's time to start reassembling the brakes now that we've got the caliper compressed and all the way back in. So this is pretty simple. I didn't take the bracket off, and a pretty easy trick. We'll just tuck it in there, and then we can rotate it. And there we go. It'll pop right on. Okay, so we got a new rotor. If you happen to be buying cross-drilled and slotted, these are directional. There was a sticker on it, so this is for the right side of the car. It'll indicate left or right. You want to make sure you get that right. All right, the next step up is we want to get our brake pads. And these brake pads, we're going to put a little bit of sill glide on the back. That's one of the steps that we got to do. And I want to make sure that I don't touch the bottom of that. And just to look, you know, we can see the comparison here of the difference between the old pad and the new pad. Look at the thickness difference. These are new Hawk HPS brake pads. They're really good. Great for the Cobra. All right, so the other thing that we're going to do, if we come up here and take a look, we need to take these glides out, and we're also going to put some sill glide on them. So to pull these out, all that we need to do is just yank them right out. We'll clean that up and go ahead and put some new sill glide on there. So what we can do is just wipe that down. You can actually just pop that sleeve off. We can wipe it down, and we'll put some fresh sill glide on it. That's what's going to help the caliper slide back and forth. Also, you can buy a replacement kit if you desire for about $5. I will say for this particular Cobra, I found out that the replacement ones, the heads are off by just about 1 millimeter or 2. So when tightening, they don't actually stop on the caliper. They continue to spin, so you have to kind of wedge a screwdriver. So I don't really like this kit that I got from O'Reilly. I will use the new bolts, but I'm going to use the old slides just in this case. A little bit of a shame, but that's all right. And there was nothing wrong with the original hardware. It would have been fine. So we'll go ahead and take some of the sill glide, can put it on there. We can spread that around and see that's the new one. And we're going to take that boot, and we could put a little bit on the outside here as well. You know, you can't, this stuff we can clean up the access, there's no problem. And then we've got the new one here. We can even lubricate the boot a little bit so that it doesn't dry out. Just get that thing, you know, and then liberal with it. And then go on the back side, just clean up that hole in that caliper bracket. Make sure it's nice and clean. And then you can just slide back in with the new sill glide, and it pops right back on. And we'll do the exact same thing for the bottom one. Yeah. All right, so now I've got the brakes, the brake pads, and I want to go ahead and put some sill glide on the back. I'm just going to smear that around. I do not want this to get on the front in any way, so we'll just keep this pretty trim. I mean, I got some on there, but I'll just go ahead and wipe off the excess. I don't want this brake pad to actually touch anything to get it dirty. So we're going to also have to transfer the clips right here off of the old pad and slide them onto the new, and then they'll squeeze right in here. So let's go ahead and transfer those now. Okay, so to take off the old clip, it's pretty easy. They just kind of snap off or slide off. We'll take the new pad and we'll just rock it in place. There's a little tab. There's one. And then we'll put the other one on. These are what will hold them in position on the caliper. And there's two. Excellent. So this one as well. Put the sill glide on. Wipe off any excess. Make sure not to get it on top or any other part of the brake pad. And now we're ready to put it in. All right, so the way to put this in is pretty straightforward. These clips, just do it evenly, and then they'll slide right in. So if we can just get them started. There we go. Oh, by the way, one other little trick to hold that rotor in place. I just would recommend using one of the lug nuts from the car. That'll keep it in place and flat while we're putting on the brake pads. All right, back up here, and there we have it. We've got our first one right in place. Now we need to put the back one on. All right, and so for the back ones, same thing. Don't just start one side or try to get them even, and then you should be able to press it right in, just the same. There we go. All right. All right, so the last step, now that we've got our caliper bracket loaded with new pads is to go ahead and put the caliper back in place and put the bolts back in. The tricky part about that is because these are springs, it's a little difficult to do on your own, but sometimes you can get lucky or sometimes you'll need another set of hands. So the first thing to do is we need to go ahead and get this around. There we go. And you have to squeeze in the slides a little bit. And then that notch in the caliper will go onto the pad. All right, we're almost there. Now, here's where it gets tricky because the springs on the inside are pushing the caliper out. So usually what I end up doing is I'll press and then I'll have a helper come in behind and turn these screws in. So I'm going to go ahead and press on here to line up this bolt and then the top. Sometimes you'll have luck maybe doing the top first and then pushing the bottom down. I usually have more luck if I can get the bottom in first and then the top goes right into place. So when I hold this in, then once I get it lined up, I can begin to screw and get that in, and then I can do the top as well. Okay, so we got both bolts in. It was a little bit difficult because of the spring tension of the new calipers. It took a little while, but once you get, I got the bottom one started first, and then the top one, they're both in. These ones are 14 millimeter. We'll go ahead and tighten these up. And the last thing we'll do is torque them down according to the manual. These should be between 23 and 26. I'm going to go right there at 25 and we'll call it done. All right, we got our torque wrench set up. Got it set 25 pounds. There we go. And we've tightened our slide bolts down. And there you have it. We've got new rotors. These happen to be Baer cross-drilled and slotted rotors. We've got new Hawk HPS pads. We've conditioned the caliper. We got it all set. And we're ready to go. So hopefully this helped you with doing rear brakes on a 2001 Mustang COBRA. This is the Eclectic Handyman. See you next time.